Okay, well, good morning and welcome to the Wisdom of the Soul. This is class number 37, I believe, and happy to be here, of course. Happy Sunday morning to you, or afternoon if you're east of us, or evening if you're in Europe or Africa or the Middle East, and then beyond that, everybody's asleep, I presume. I want to remind you that this program is podcast to all players and directories. And wherever you get your podcasts, search Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. And also on YouTube, the full program, the podcast is edited. Take out the meditation and the Q&A. But the full class, the video is posted on YouTube. Again, search Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. And if you're interested in a free intake session for my private work, just go to michaelbenner.com. You'll see a red circle that'll give you access to my calendar, and you can schedule it. Absolutely free and no obligation whatsoever. Mostly what we work with is anxiety disorders, but it's just amazing how many of our problems are consequences of not understanding ourselves. And all of that is a result of anxiety and stress and tension. So to work with anxiety disorders, it's not really a panacea. It's not like every problem that you could have mentally and emotionally is a function of anxiety. But stress, fear, anxiety, from mild apprehension and nervousness all the way out to panic and terror, phobias, OCD, PTSD. It's a full range of dysfunctions that accrue when we're stressed out. So part of what this class is about, Wisdom of the Soul, is learning to explore what sometimes I call the extraordinary power of tranquility. Peace, as I'm sure each of you knows, is much more than the absence of conflict or the absence of violence. It's a level of awareness. And the more peaceful we are, the more aware we become. It's like waking up and seeing what you hadn't seen before. And then, in terms of mindfulness, being aware that you are that awareness, noticing what you notice. It's one thing to become more aware. It's another to realize that you are awareness. And that stepping stone is to be aware that you're aware. So it's more than a word game. It's a wonderful enigma to consider that you are much more than the separated individual living in this body. Today we're going to talk about mysticism and what I've described in the newsletter in the title of today's class as the wisdom traditions of the world. And I have a screen share that I'll do after the meditation, and we'll go through some of the mystical traditions, some of which are affiliated with religions, and many are not. They're, well, probably better said, philosophies, but they emphasize personal experience. That's the primary difference between mysticism and organized religion, is the emphasis on the experience of ecstasy, the wonderful, soaring, loving feeling of harmony and union that comes from deep and profound peace, a state of expanded awareness, as I said, or sometimes called higher consciousness. Let's begin with our opening meditation, and then we'll go to that and talk about the wisdom traditions of the world. From sea to shining sea, see what we can learn. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Sit up in your chair or on your bed if you're in a yoga position on a meditation pillow or in a straight back chair, wherever you happen to be, I want you to think of yourself as balanced and centered. So sit up, put your shoulders back, maybe raise your chin just a little bit, and close your eyes. And begin by allowing yourself to just feel settled in your body. Tell yourself for the next few minutes, and hopefully for the remainder of the class today, there's nowhere else you need to go. There's really nothing you need to do. And so you can sit in the present moment and relax. Turning your attention with my narrative and guidance from the world of sense and sensation inward toward the awareness of your thought stream, your emotional nature, and any physical sensations that may arise in the body. Notice that as you sit quietly, those thoughts that petition you for your attention, that demand engagement and insist you follow them wherever they go, all of that begins to slow down. It recedes somewhat. There's less urgency as you create and sense a letting go feeling from the top of your head to the soles of your feet. Feel the letting go. Muscles relaxing and unwinding. And along the way, take a couple of slow, deep breaths, inhaling through the nose slowly, pulling in power. Hold for just a beat, and exhale just as slowly through the nose or the mouth, and feel the letting go as you exhale, all the way out. Do that a couple of more times, pulling in strength and power as you inhale, and feel a deep letting go, the safety of relaxation as you exhale. One more time, big breath, and let go as you exhale. Think of yourself as sitting in the present, that any thoughts from the past, like memories, or about the past, like rumination, see them as distractions, just for the next few minutes. Any concerns about the future, in the same way, consider them distractions for now. And remind yourself that concentration is a relaxation skill. You don't try to relax. You give up trying. Relaxation is letting go. Allowing your mind to settle. Giving it a vacation from constant thought. Even thinking about our feelings, as if that were going to help us understand somewhat why we feel the way we feel. When in fact, the language of emotional feelings is intuition, not logic. Nor worry. I want you to think of yourself sitting outdoors on a bluff overlooking the ocean. And you see the shoreline and you see the ocean. You see the beach. You see homes, houses, maybe businesses from your elevated perspective up here in the bluff. You see all manner of boats and ships on the ocean, from small sailboats to larger craft. And from this elevated perspective, you can see far enough to see the larger merchant vessels and cargo ships steaming up and down the coastline. The sky is filled with clouds. It's a beautiful sunny day. White, puffy, cumulus clouds, birds, songbirds, shorebirds, seagulls, pelicans. It's a busy scene, offering much to think about. The clouds could cause you to follow a thought train about clouds. You could think about times you were in an airplane and enjoyed flying above the clouds and looking down at them. Or remember being a little kid and flying a kite. And so too, the boats, the people on the beach, any of these images can trigger a whole train of thoughts. Notice, however, most of those thoughts, if not all of them, are spontaneous and rise up on their own. Given the association, they nevertheless bubble up. Without any deliberate purpose. You didn't choose to study the clouds or to judge the people on the beach. There's nothing much to learn about the boats, other than this is, in its entirety, a beautiful, tranquil scene. So much to think about, so much to feel. So let's begin to eliminate the elements. Imagine the seashore disappearing. And you see the ocean and the sky. Imagine the boats, the sailboats, the cargo vessels, all the ships at sea disappearing. And you see ocean and sky. Imagine the birds disappearing. No birds. And the clouds too. So you see simply blank ocean and blank sky. And a horizon where ocean meets sky. And then disappear the ocean. And you have only blank sky. The emptiness of the sky. Nothing to think about besides the fact that you're noticing there's nothing to think about. And at first it's a little uncomfortable, unusual. And the mind becomes concerned, so it casts about, searching for something to think about. Driven in many cases by feelings that are looking for reasons to exist. How often do you recognize an emotion or set of emotional feelings that are searching for a reason to exist, to justify existing? And is that not a kind of mild anxiety? And could we let that go too? Just for a few minutes. There are things that need to be done, things we need to do later today, but how about just for 10 minutes or so? We practice observing an empty sky. The sky is empty in many ways. Sky is a word. It's a name. But it's not really a thing. The sky has no beginning. It has no end. You cannot touch the sky. It's impossible to discern where the sky becomes outer space. Though if you were approaching this planet from the moon or elsewhere, you'd clearly see this blue planet floating in outer space. But we don't think of ourselves as being in outer space. That would be someplace else. So really, there is no sky. But it's blue. So it must exist. Nothing is blue except the frequencies that are reflected by the atmosphere. Blue is in your head. The fragrance of a flower is perceived in your mind. It exists not in the world, but in your mind. To understand yourself and the world in which we appear to live, it's essential that we understand the mind and the nature of personal reality. As valuable as physics and hard science like chemistry, biology, botany, geology, as valuable as measuring, weighing, and understanding the physical world. It's such a small sliver, such a tiny fragment of reality. Our empirical scientists tell us that 90% of the universe is invisible and unseen. It is energy and mass, so-called dark energy and dark matter, that does not reflect light, cannot be touched, cannot be measured in any other way other than through observing its gravitational impact. But to all sense and sensation, it does not exist. And as rich and wonderful as our physical senses are, most animals see, hear, and smell far beyond the limits of the human being. I've never heard of a human being able to follow a trail through the woods based on smell, but an old hound dog could a day later. Imagine somebody running through the woods with boots, running through the woods, and a day later a hound dog picks up the scent. So many animals can see beyond our ability to see. Colors that we have no idea even exist. The colors below red and above violet that proceed infinitely, expanding in all directions. And this little sliver from red to violet, 7 colors and their variations. It's all we see. Many animals hear things we do not hear. Our hearing is limited to a range of 20 cycles to 20,000 cycles per second. Most animals can hear sounds higher than 20,000 cycles per second. If you ever listen to a recording of whale sounds or dolphins, what you hear is just a small fraction of the sound that they're making and communicating with. Whales can hear each other over great distances, up to 100 miles. But the sounds cannot be perceived by the human mind. And yet they exist. How much exists that we're unaware of? So accept the limitations of sense and sensation and understand what we call reality is perception. And it's personal. And there's a lot of overlap and potential for agreement. Yes, the sky is blue. The grass is green. Clouds are white until they're not. The nature of personal reality is liberating. Objectivity, so-called, is merely the extent to which we can agree. This is liberating. This is freedom. The freedom to perceive, to comprehend, to choose what you're aware of and the extent to which you are aware. When you listen to music, consider that you have the ability to hear all the instruments and the vocalists at the same time, and yet you could also choose to focus on one. Most people, if there are lyrics, will focus on the lyric, but they hear all the other instruments. And understand that simply by forming the intention, you could play that same recording a second time and listen only to the drums, and of course you would hear all the other instruments. But like a drummer might do, you focus on the drums, and then play that same recording a third time and listen, focus your awareness on just the bass line. Of course, you still hear the lyrics and the drums and the guitars and keyboard instruments and how much reverb they put on the track, and you could perceive it in countless ways. You also have the ability to focus, to be selective in your awareness, sometimes for better, but when it's unconscious, sometimes not so good. And then we wonder why we disagree. Take ownership of this, that you are aware of what you are aware of, and your neighbor, your friend, the guy down the street is aware of what he and she are aware of. And while there may be a great deal of overlap, there are significant points where we will disagree because we're just not sharing that awareness. There's very little that is objective, so to speak, about our perception of reality. Again, this is liberating. This is a freedom. This is where peace is found. In allowing yourself to simply watch and to expand that awareness, to look for that which you have not been aware of, that you might include it in an expanded view, to promote insight and understanding. Insight and understanding that arises on its own without effort as you use deep peace and relaxation to expand your awareness. More insight, more understanding beyond mere knowledge. And this is wisdom. Wisdom begins with becoming aware of what you've overlooked, of considering what you do not know. In a world where most people are focused desperately on what they know, only what they know, defending and rationalizing what they know without an awareness of what they don't know. The truth is, nobody likes a know-it-all except the know-it-all. And the know-it-all is going to let you know that they know it all. and invalidate your view so they can be right and feel safe. Imagine having to negate everything that you don't know and understand in order to feel safe, to ignore it, deny it, to refuse to tolerate disagreement. There's no freedom in that. Contemplate the empty sky from time to time. Let your mind empty. And notice that without thought, without strong emotional feeling, without physical action, you remain. Say to yourself, I am that which remains beyond the mind. Eternal and infinite, a fragment, an element, an extension of the one thing, awareness, the absolute, consciousness itself. Again, make mental note to reflect on emptiness, the emptiness of the sky from time to time. Hold this awareness gently as you prepare to return to the waking state, back in the room in which you sit. Form the intention to return. 2, imagine a slow rising, a waking, a drifting upward toward the waking state. And 3, eyes open, wide awake, back in the room, eyes open, wide awake, feeling fine, feeling better than before. Better than before. And take a big breath. And maybe stretch a little bit, like you do when you first wake up. Get your energy body in your physical body. Fingers in the finger places, like you're putting on mittens, toes in the toe places. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. All right. What is mysticism? And what are the wisdom traditions of the world? I put together a little handout for us that I'm going to screen share, and we'll go through slowly. I think you'll find this helpful. I put this together because, actually, I tend to do these kinds of things a lot. I have numerous lists where I'm, sort of defining my interests. Because this kind of stuff, you can find documents, writing, essays, letters, material on each of these fields, each of these mystical, let's call them schools, mystery schools. But I think the challenge is to take a step back and foster a kind of an overview. That's what I'd like to do with this handout today. So let's start at the top here. I'll just read this introductory part about the impact of Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings. These books cause people to ask, are there really wizards and are there really wizard schools? And yes, there are wizards, hierophants, and shamans. They're mystics. That's what a mystic is. He or she is, again, take your pick, wizard, hierophant, shaman, mystic, esotericist. Pretty much covers it. All students of consciousness, like Merlin from the Arthurian legends, Gandalf and Dumbledore, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, just some of the better-known mythological masters of the ageless wisdom. And then this first paragraph below the header. Here's the list I want to go over with you. Freemasonry, heard of the Masons, the Illuminati, all these service clubs that have spun off of Freemasonry, like the Shriners, right? What are they about with those little fezzes and the optimists and the Soroptimists and the Oddfellows and the Rebecca Lodge and there's so many of them. But Freemasonry, that's one of the original, well, more than a service club. It's a mystery school of esoteric wisdom. And again, I'm not going to dwell long on each of these. I just want to list them. My mother was raised Catholic in a very Catholic family. So she raised her kids, me and my brother and sister, to be Catholic. And I remember one day my mother and I, walking to the library in our little hometown in southwest Michigan. And we had to walk by a lodge, a Freemason lodge. And I noticed, even though I was only 8 or 10 years old, that her step quickened. And she sort of held herself a little more tightly as she hurried by this Masonic lodge. And it's because the fear of God was put into her by her Catholic training, that the Freemasons are evil somehow. And they are esoteric, and it's not an organized religion. But there is a very sophisticated philosophy that goes with Freemasonry. In many ways, it's a kind of a front or a public face for Rosicrucianism, and which is second on our list here. And this is the order of the the Holy Cross, the Rosy Cross. And their symbol includes, they have many, many symbols, but one is the cross with a rose right in the center of it at the intersection of the horizontal and vertical. And that's a rich symbol that perhaps we'll talk about in depth at some time. Right now, I just want to skate over this. So these are strong Judeo-Christian, esoteric approaches to spiritual, quasi-religious, philosophical ideas, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, esoteric philosophy in general. Kabbalah, I'm sure you know, is the mysticism of the Jewish religion. And I say that like there's one Jewish religion, which is not true. Obviously, all religions vary from temple to temple, parish to parish. But Kabbalah, there's Jewish Kabbalah from several thousand years ago, going back arguably to the time of Moses even. But there's also a more universal Kabbalah that comes out of Europe in the Renaissance era. So if you wonder at that, and the 3 or 4 different spellings of Kabbalah is always confusing. Neo-Platonism is interesting. I'm not sure Plato would recognize Neo-Platonism, but it's very mystical. The focus, again, very much on personal experience. It's important to read books and study the scripture and the literature. Secondly, it's very important that we are logical and reasonable and encourage debate and disagreement as a way of understanding. But in addition to reading the literature and learning to be a critical thinker, we have to honor personal experience. And again, that's one of the primary threads in all of these mystical traditions. Hermetic philosophy, Hermetic alchemy, Hermeticism. This is ancient Egyptian philosophy. And alchemy, again, was a favorite subject of Newton. He studied alchemy. And John Dee in the literature of England and consultants to the crown. There were alchemists like John Dee and later Newton. So it's not just some silly... Chemistry did not eliminate alchemy the way many would say astronomy eliminated astrology, right? Like many astronomers would mock astrology, saying, well, that's what we used to think about the stars. We now have telescopes and rocket ships and we know better. So astrology has been supplanted by astronomy. Well, chemistry did not really replace alchemy. They're allied, but quite different. And alchemy continues to exist. Deep and profound science and philosophy. Gnosticism. A Gnostic is one who knows. It's a Greek word for knowledge. So who were the Gnostics and what did they know? Probably easiest just to say that the Gnostics were groups of Jewish mystics and early Christian mystics, really. They come from a time between Christ walking on earth and the first Christian church, the Catholic Church, being formed 400 years later. During that interim period, there were Jews that saw what later became Christianity as just another branch of Judaism, but one that was very progressive, one that saw Christ Jesus as a mystic who really believed him when he said, these things I do, you can do, and more, that we're all sons of God and daughters, or all children of the Most High. So, of course, they fell into disfavor when Constantine and his Catholic bishops organized the Catholic Church in the 5th century in Nicaea. But Gnostics are still around and very vital. And of course, in the late 1940s, there were the so-called Gnostic Gospels, or the Nag Hammadi Dead Sea Scrolls, sometimes they're referred to. They're the Nag Hammadi Gospels, which are Gnostic Gospels. They're part of the Apocrypha that Constantine had banished and burned. And later got found, later, I mean like 2,000 years later, in the 1940s, they were found in clay jars, often fragments. And the boys that found these Gnostic Gospels they didn't know what they had. And so they were burning them as fuel for their fire. Imagine that. And fortunately, somebody who knew their significance stopped that. But most of what survives are just little shreds, little tiny pieces of paper that have been cobbled together by scientists and studied ever since. That's part of the Apocrypha. All the material that Constantine and his bishops left out of the Bible, so to speak. Shamanism, you recognize shamanism. That's in every culture and every society from time out of mind. These are the medicine men and women, the witch doctors, people who very pantheistic. They celebrate the earth sciences. They're healers. And again, saw the divine in everything. Saw the world is sacred. The ocean is sacred. The mountains are sacred. The sky, the clouds, everything is sacred. The animals. And everything has a spirit. Perennialism is an interesting term that I really like. I relate to perennialism. Perennialism is a reference to the perennial philosophy, sometimes called the ageless wisdom, sometimes called ancient wisdom, sometimes called Prisca Theologia, which is Latin for the first theology, the first religious teachings. But what perennialism suggests is more than old or pre-religious, but you know what a perennial flower is, right? It persists. It continues on. You don't have to replant every year. It's a perennial. It just keeps popping up on its own. And so perennial philosophy is this all-encompassing, absolutely inclusive embrace of all religion and all philosophy from a very progressive, very liberal point of view. Again, emphasizing, as all these wisdom traditions do, personal experience. Not to the exclusion of reading scripture or being a critical thinker, being logical, but also not being limited to the dogma, the rules, the rituals, and the ceremonies of organized religion, which is based on authoritarianism. And this is the one right way to look at it, which is why every religion has thousands of sects within it. Nobody agrees. And that's a good thing, except for those who are so entrenched in their particular belief system that they think any variation is wrong. There have been attempts to bring perennialism forward, the World Parliament of Religions. There have been other efforts to celebrate the harmony and the unity of everyone who seeks to understand their source or their own nature beyond the physical being, the energy that illumines and animates us. I like that term, perennialism. The perennial, I guess I'm comfortable calling myself a perennialist. It's sort of like, hey, this is all good. But you got to cherry pick, because we're humans. We get confused, and again, reality is a personal experience. So if you're going to explore the nature of wisdom, of insight and understanding, then you're going to have to look at all of these. And again, that to me is the whole idea of what a liberal arts education is. You're not looking for the truth in one right way, such that everything else is wrong. You're looking for truth where it reinforces. It's like the repeatable experiment in empiricism, where if I can get the same results from repeating the scientific method, that's what it's called, right? If I can get the same results or similar results from repeating an experiment, that helps me to validate it. We can do that with spirituality, with mysticism. We can meditate every day and compare and contrast the experiences that we have. So enough of this one right way nonsense. Sufism, the Sufis are the mystics of Islam. These are the liberal, progressive Muslims, if you will. Very rich tradition, and quite closely related to Neo-Platonism, and a book called the Enneads that's come from the old Greek mystery schools out of Alexandria. If you think of the whirling dervish, if you've ever seen the Middle Eastern dancers, the whirling dervishes, they're Sufis. Yoga, of course. The Yoga Sutras are attributed to a fellow named Patanjali or Patanjali. Not sure which pronunciation is correct, but he put them together. Again, no one really knows. 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, something on that order. And they come out of Vedic philosophy, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and again, really predate. Yoga is a practice that is not only spiritual, but, a physical practice, hatha yoga in particular, the asanas, the stretching, the stimulation of the endocrine glands, all of this as preparation for meditation. It's sort of odd that yoga in the West, in this day and age, is seen pretty much as just exercises. And often people say, yeah, I do yoga, I go to yoga, or hot yoga, cardio yoga, but I don't meditate. Well, yoga means union. The word yoga means union, and that's why you meditate, so that you can connect with your source and with all things, since the source is in all things, and all things are in the source. So why would you go through all the preparation leading up to meditation and then skip the meditation? Well, because we've appropriated it from a culture that understood it. And it's a huge field. There are stems of yoga, schools of yoga, different types of yoga. Not an expert at it, but it certainly is mystical in its nature and should be included in this list. Buddhism, I must admit that there is some legitimate disagreement about whether Buddhism could be correctly called mystical. People debate whether Buddhism is a religion or a philosophy. The fact that Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, in other words, Gautama Siddhartha Buddha, there are ostensibly, according to Buddhism, millions and millions of Buddhas in this universe. Usually when you talk about Buddha, it's Shakyamuni Buddha, which is this individual that lived 2,500 years ago, and the stories of his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, his discovery of the middle way. But he never talked about God. He would refuse. People would ask him about God, and he wouldn't talk about it. Basically, his responses were not unlike those of Jesus Christ when he was asked, "Why do you teach in parables? Why all the metaphor?" And Jesus said, "Because if I told you straight out, you wouldn't understand me, and I don't really have the words, because this language we speak, you haven't figured them out. You haven't seen a need for the words. I don't have the words. I have to teach in parables." And then along come fundamentalists, Christians 2,000 years later, who take the Bible literally, and they're proud to tell you they take it literally. I guess every part except for that section in Matthew where Christ said, "I have to teach in metaphor." All right? So you reap what you sow. What does that mean? And so too with Buddhism, he never talks about God. It's not really a religion at all, but it is mystical in that the emphasis is on personal awareness and enlightenment. So that has to be included, I think, in the list of the world wisdom tradition. Certainly, wisdom is a term that's used a lot in Buddhism. Taoism also, Taoism comes out of the teachings of Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, in China. Again, almost the same time as Buddha and the Greek philosophers, Pythagoras and Plato and Aristotle and Socrates. All of this is coming down, Lao Tzu and Buddha, at about the same time, roughly 400, 500 years before Christ. So Christ knew about all of these mystical traditions, obviously. Taoism is very similar to Buddhism. And then Theosophy and Anthroposophy, we got to throw these in here, and I think this is fascinating, to me anyway. It sort of comes full circle. It's back to Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism now. Theosophists and Anthroposophists, how can I tell you about Theosophy? First of all, there is by the way, it's straight up noon, and I really would love some questions about this. So be thinking about what you could ask, or maybe just a comment that you have, or a question. And as we normally ask you to do, just put it in the chat box, and then Melinda will read it, and you'll have a chance to expand on it if you want. But do that now. Start putting your questions and comments in the chat box. I'd appreciate it. Theosophy has a capital T Theosophy and a small t Theosophy. The small t Theosophy is a mystical tradition that goes back to the Rhineland mystics of Europe in the 13th and 14th century. Small t Theosophy is hundreds of years old. And again, it's an esoteric look at Christianity, at Catholicism, since this was before the Reformation, before the Protestants said, we want Bibles, we want to read, we want to figure this stuff out, and the Catholic Church is way too corrupt, selling indulgences, allowing you a way to buy passage into heaven, to shortcut purgatory with indulgences, little prayers. When I was a kid in the Catholic Church, we didn't have Bibles, we had missals, which were books of the church's teachings. And in there were these little phrases that you could say, like little mini prayers. And after each one, it would actually say how many days credit you get for saying this prayer. Each time you say this prayer, you get 355 days. You say this prayer, you get 78 days off your sentence in purgatory, which is sort of the waiting room. Like, you're not good enough to go to heaven, but you're not bad enough to go to hell, so you have to go to purgatory and do whatever you do in purgatory. They were never that clear about it. But even at 6, 7, 8 years old, I thought, this is crazy. That I can sit here and that somebody's got a big book and that I can earn credits, like merit badges. I was in Cub Scouts at the time. It's like earning merit badges to shorten my sentence in purgatory before I trundle off to heavenly bliss. Well, those were being sold by the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, and that was one of the reasons that the Protestants, broke off with the Reformation, Martin Luther and all of that. There's also a capital T theosophy, which is a group founded in the mid-1800s by a Russian mystic named Blavatsky, Helena Petrova Blavatsky, HPB. A lot of mystics like to use initials when they write. So she's HPB, or HP Blavatsky. And she has several important books from the 19th century that she wrote. The Secret Doctrine, Isis Unveiled. But man, I'll tell you, this is really heavy, pithy, deeply esoteric, and not very well edited, I must say. There have been some official attempts by the Theosophical Organization to come up with edited versions of the Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled, because Blavatsky would often go off on these rants and get sidetracked. Following on Blavatsky's work were other theosophists that were part of this group that was organized. See, Ledbetter, what was his name? I think it was Hugh Ledbetter. Annie Besant, or Besant, B-E-S-A-N-T. She wrote a lot of material. These folks found Krishnamurti as a boy and educated him in England, believing that he was a messiah. And he was trained to come forward as a savior for the world, based largely on Judeo-Christian tradition. But the thing about Theosophists, although it's originally Christian mysticism, is the capital T Theosophy of Blavatsky embraced yoga and the mystical traditions within Hinduism and Buddhism to a large degree, and Taoism, since it's so closely related. So Blavatsky's school of theosophy was really esoteric and eclectic. And the funny story about Krishnamurti, who spent most of his adult life in Ojai, California, and there's still Meditation Mount and a fabulous bookstore called Crotona, and Ojai is a very trippy place to visit, largely because of the influence of these mystical traditions like Theosophy. Krishnamurti said Ojai, California always reminded him of his home in India. But when it came time for his big coming out in the 60s, I think it was, he fooled everybody. He was all ready to do this big announcement that he was the Maitreya, he was the Savior, he was Christ born again, come to save the world. And on opening night, he says, sorry, I'm not any of those things. I'm just a guy, and I can't do that. Well, Theosophy then split into two schools. one headquartered in Pasadena, California, another one in Wheaton, Illinois. They also have publishing houses in India. And it's a big organization, and again, very, very eclectic. Capital T Theosophy. I should also mention Alice Bailey's remarkable work. Alice Bailey is a theosophist in the Blavatsky tradition. And Anthroposophy, that's Rudolf Steiner. And it's not super popular, but they do have their own schools. They do certify teachers. It's sort of like Montessori with a strong spiritual bent. Anthroposophy includes a lot of astrology, even numerology, sacred geometry. The Steiner schools, Rudolf Steiner is the primary organizer of the anthroposophists. And then to complete the paragraph this is nestled into, these are just some of the schools that teach the greater mysteries to their most worthy students. Increasingly, Americans are leaving their churches, their temples and mosques, to find spiritual meaning and fulfillment in the world's ancient wisdom traditions. And I think we're up to now, the last poll I saw was right around 40% of American adults now describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. And if you've been a churchgoer, you've seen the churches dwindling. Attendance is what I'm trying to say. The attendance is diminishing in these organized churches, and they're not sure what to do about it. Some of the churches are allowing women to be priests. Gay people can be priests and ministers now in many of the churches. Even the Baptist church right now is changing. Some of these very strict, ultra-conservative churches are being forced to modernize just to attract people who have good hearts. And they want to be good Christians or spiritually oriented people, but the shoe just doesn't fit these ancient medieval teachings. They just don't work for people. They don't answer the questions that they need answering. And so the idea that you have to take this set of books called the Holy Bible, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the so-called New Testament, cobbled together from the Apocrypha by Constantine, that stuff has to be taken literally. It is why people increasingly are rejecting religion in favor of spirituality. Why? Because they still feel the longing in their heart. They still feel a connection to everything. And again, in religious traditions, that longing is described as the love of God and God's love for each of us. But in the mystical traditions, the longing that we feel in the heart is an antidote to the illusion of separation. It's a sense of wholeness, of oneness, that we're connected not only to some personified being or character called God who lives on a cloud very far away, viewing his creation at a distance, to the idea of everything is sacred. Everything exists in the body of God, so to speak, that the material universe is the body of God, that God didn't create the universe, God is the universe. And again, if we're talking about mysticism and spiritual traditions, that's a major belief system, major alternative. And next week we'll pick this up. We'll talk a little more about pantheism, panentheism, which we touched on a few weeks ago. Panpsychism, I bet that's a new word for most of you. What is panpsychism? And how is monism different from monotheism? These are important to your study. You have to have this is really foundational. This is the basics. And again, I'm never going to tell you the one right way to look at any of this. The whole idea is to blow all of this open and study all religions and all philosophies, emphasizing scripture. You can't just read the Bible. You've got to read the Apocrypha, the Gnostic Gospels. You've got to read the Quran. What do you mean you haven't read the Quran? How could you know anything about Islam if you haven't read the Quran? You got to read the Gita, the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And you say, well, I don't have time to do all I don't have time to do all of that. Well, that's why a lot of these mystery schools came forward. They said, well, we'll cobble together the course. And indeed, to some extent, that's what we're doing here on Sundays. Okay, it's about 10 after. Melinda, do we have any comments or questions?
Nothing is showing up in the chat, but I'm sure if we give people a couple little seconds, that was so much information. We're either stunned or in awe, or we want you to keep going. I don't know which. Anybody? That was quite a lot.
Well, let me ask you, what stood out for you? What intrigued you? What was new, or what in there did you find especially interesting?
Well, one thing I found awe-inspiring was your fund of knowledge and your ability to recall. I know this has been your life's work, but still in all, it's just nice to have that resource, because I will never have the time to, or the inclination to devote my life to it the way you have. So that's amazing. One question I had was, this is such a diverse group of beliefs. What would you say the one uniting thought or factor is? Because to me, it seems as though we're born with an inherent urge to go on this quest. It's just existed forever.
That's the longing of the heart. You know, there's a spiritual abandonment with spiritual alienation that we all experience, being spiritual creatures that have been dropped into these separated bodies. And we slowly become aware as children that we exist. And then we're educated, and in terms of religion, usually indoctrinated by authoritarian institutions. The thread, I think, that runs through all of this is respect for the scripture and for the belief systems of everyone. Truly, we have to respect any individual who wishes to know more about themselves, their neighbors, and so-called reality. To want to know, to want to understand, is to find the peace that surpasses understanding, or I like to say the understanding that surpasses knowledge. So reading and honoring all religious traditions, even if you disagree strongly with some of them and less so with others, to be logical about matters of faith may sound like a contradiction, but beside the reading of the holy books, we have to be eminently logical and critical in our thinking. Faith is important, but it's not a substitute for clear, rational thinking. But thirdly, Melinda, the whole idea of the personal experience of ecstatic states, altered states of ecstasy, the bliss, the love, the contentment, the fulfillment, the bliss that comes from deep and profound peace. And the awareness that this is not attained. It's not There's no there. It's it's not the spiritual journey. It's a valuable metaphor, the idea of life being a journey, but we're not really going anywhere. We already have a spiritual nature within us. This love, spiritual love, capital L love, this divine essence, this deep and profound peace, this ability to understand beyond reason, consistently, and to recognize through the ecstatic state, the altered state, the bliss that psychedelics emulate. That's what's so amazing about psychedelics, and what's created such a strong interest in mysticism and Eastern philosophy is these states of expanded awareness that, fortunately, we don't need psychoactive chemicals to discover within us. The peace and the love, the wisdom, the compassion, the loving kindness, the mercy, all of these virtues and qualities are already in each and every one of us, even the most despicable of human beings who've worked so hard to bury that spiritual nature and to cover it up and to live in a world that's about money and power, worship money and power. What did Christ say? Render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Render unto God what is God. That's the emphasis, I think, that it's already in here. You don't have to find love. You are the love you're looking for. That's the challenge, is what does that mean? See? And so we're still inventing words. We're still inventing concepts. And we're still learning through empirical science the extent to which quantum physics. Just a couple of weeks ago, we did that class on the double slit experiment, because awareness has an impact, consciousness has an impact on energy and matter. You look at energy with awareness, it becomes matter. You don't look at it when it's not observed, it's just energy. Quantum science, what Einstein called spooky science, is reinforcing what the mystics have said from time out of mind about we're in a hologram, we're watching a movie, we're making it up as we go along. Everyone's having a personal experience here.
Right. And I think Jack might have something to add to that if you have time to hear that.
Indeed.
Jack, would you like to state it?
There, yeah. Hi.
Hi, Jack.
Yeah, this is stuff I really love. And I was just going to suggest about the relationship between religion and mysticism. I really believe most religions come out of mystical experience, and the original religious practices usually are intended to create the mystical experience. But as time goes on, often that journey toward the experience is forgotten, and then even often left out. And what's left is a kind of legal framework where you do the practice, and then you're in a sort of proper legal relationship with God, and everything's going to be okay. But you lose the transformation of consciousness. You lose often the development of the heart. Although there are people, even very simple religious people, that still are able to reach those mystical experiences. One reference that I always have, there was a Black woman from the South that used to take care of us when we were kids. And my dad kept a relationship with her. So we would go visit her and Watts as teenagers. I remember visiting her one time, and she came from a really simple background, but she was obviously not just intelligent, she was wise. And I remember her saying as we were leaving one time, um, that I should pray to Jesus, which sounds like a kind of normal Christian thing to say, except when she said it to me, I felt like I was struck by a lightning bolt. And I knew that when she said Jesus, it was something I had no idea what it was, but it was so much more profound and deep than anything I had been exposed to. So I knew this, this simple woman that no, hardly anybody was going to pay any attention to, or certainly give any kind of proper respect, was as profound as basically anybody I was ever going to meet, or the people I wouldn't meet. And she did this, I don't know how she did this, she did this on her own, going to probably Baptist churches. So there are people that take religion all the way, but unfortunately I don't think it's the mystical part of it is really emphasized enough, and a lot of people stop at just the outward exoteric form.
Well, I think the reason that even contemplation, much less dedicated meditation for the ecstatic experience, has been discouraged is that then the church loses its perceived authority.
Exactly.
If it's saying, well, this means whatever you think it means. In fact, you don't have to look far to find church doctrine, documents, papal bulls, whatever, that speak very clearly that you are not to believe what you want to believe. Religion is a narrow path, and that the church is in charge of deciding what you study and what it means. So part of the problem with that is that, like when this woman said, you pray to Jesus, we immediately get an image of the man, the historical man, Jesus of Nazareth, just like the word God conjures up images of the old fella on the Sistine Chapel reaching out from some other place. What's missing is a concept of Christos. What is the Christos? What is the Christ? It's not Jesus' last name. It's obviously a title like Shri or Maharaj or Mahatma. It's a title that is a reference to the consciousness of Jesus. Christ consciousness is a level of awareness, an elevated perspective, where Jesus obviously saw, experienced, and understood reality on an entirely different level. That consciousness, when I think of pray to Jesus, it's like you can get on your knees, humble yourself, put your hands together, and envision this historical man who's now living with his Father in heaven. Or you can aspire to stand open and receptive that you may be imbued with the consciousness, the expanded awareness of the Christ, in which case we could seek to be Christed, right? Well, the only way you can do that in the church is by ritual and ceremony, if you're a Catholic, or what's that other Church of England that does the communion? That's the word I'm looking for. Communion, the ritual of drinking the blood and eating the body of Christ, a celebration of the Last Supper, and Christ's blood and all of that. It's a little vampire-y for me. And the whole emphasis on crucifixion looks a lot like human sacrifice as well. But what does that have to do with the words of Christ? Maybe the message of Calvary is more about, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Maybe it's this extreme compassion and this devotion to love and kindness, and again, compassion for the suffering of others, that we seek to go through this, that as souls we have, well, that's another thing, that's another tangent, the pre-existence of the soul I haven't even touched on. Mystical traditions, as I'm sure you know, to a large degree anyway, are built on the idea that the soul is not only indwelling, but exists above and free of form, and that we can communicate with the soul. Hence, this class is called the wisdom of the soul. So we could pray to our own soul. Now, if your soul's already in heaven, what's the church doing? The church has cast itself in the role of Christ. And so, listen to us. There's a guy on the radio. When I lived in LA, there was a guy on the radio that did the Jesus Christ show.
He's still on.
Is he?
Yes.
My God, how talk about idolatry and blasphemy, engraven images. God, or the God complex incarnate. I just don't know. It's challenging enough for me to hold myself out as a teacher, and risk being perceived as somebody who thinks of himself as somehow superior. It's a difficult role to play because my ego would love that. My ego would love to dress up like a spiritual person and be all holy and wear robes, and I like to wear, even this is too much. This mala. I'd like to do a class on the mala, but I've been hesitant to do it, because again, it starts taking me off the eclectic nature of mysticism and looks more like, oh, it's a mala, it's not a rosary, so you're not a Christian, you're a Hindu, or maybe a Buddhist. This is just a way that I count my breathing. It can be used with mantras, of course, and we can talk about how to use a mala at some point. Or you can just wear the darn thing, which I've resisted doing in this class, but I'll do now. Just because of that concern that I have about, holding myself out as some sort of holy man. And I'm not that. I'm a teacher, but I'm not spiritually advanced above any of you. It's the aspiration. It's the wonder. If life is going to be wonderful, let's wonder. It's the awe of, wow, what don't I know? What don't I understand? What could I begin to incorporate into my mystical searching? And that's what I love, not holding myself out as some authority. And yet the ego wants that. I can feel my ego saying, oh yeah, it's that's so cool. And how many gurus, end up destroying their lives because they have these great teachings, but they're having sexual affairs with their students and or some sort of corruption. History is full of these people who begin to take themselves, these spiritual teachers that take themselves too seriously and get caught up in Rajneesh, for example. Really? 26 Rolls Royces? I mean, come on. What the hell? He was so embarrassed at the end of it, he had to change his name to Osho. But enough of that. That's part of my concern about all of this. And yet, if you ask the average person on the street, what's a mystic? What is mysticism? I don't think most people know. I don't think they figured it out yet. I think everybody's a mystic. Everybody would love to be a mystic if only they knew what it was. Okay. Anything else, Jack?
Oh, no.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Anybody else, Mindy?
Not that I see.
All right. Let's wrap it up then. Thank you so very much for being here, making this an event and not just a pre-recorded podcast that I do. I really enjoy you being here and knowing that it's a live event. We're connecting. And love for you to invite your friends. Just send them to michaelbenner.com and put their email address in the appropriate form. It says free Zoom class. And all we need is a first name and an email. Then they get the newsletter, they get the link, and they're good to go. So invite your friends and your associates. Remember, as I said earlier, we do podcasts on all players and apps, and you'll also find us on YouTube. Just in any event, search your podcast player, your YouTube search, or Google Ageless Wisdom Mystery School. It's all there. Thank you very much. Namaste, aloha, salam. Please unmute and say so long and farewell till next week to your friends. And thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much.
Glad
Bye.
you could all come.
Bye.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.
Bye,
Melinda.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for voting.
So much, Michael.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.